Hey everybody, we're learning a little bit more detail now about the ear again, and the things you should be able to do after this video are explain the function of each part of the ear in more detail than we've learnt, and explain how cochlear implants actually improve people who've got hearing loss. Okay, so here's what we learned about the ear so far, and you should know all the different parts. You also should be able to explain each stage in how these parts work together to help us hear. So remember, the first stage in hearing is the sound wave goes in and it's collected by the auricle and it focuses the sound wave into the ear canal. And then the sound wave goes through the ear canal until it hits the eardrum, and then that vibrates the eardrum. Then the eardrum's connected to the ossicles, and they all vibrate and carry the vibrations into the cochlea here. The cochlea detects those vibrations because it's filled with fluid, and the vibrations on the outside of the cochlea here cause the fluid to ripple and have sound waves go through it. And then the ripples are picked up by hair cells here, which have little hairs on, and the hair cells send the message to the nerve, and the nerve carries the message to the brain. So we should know all those stages of hearing now. There are only two more details now to learn, and they're not to do with hearing itself, but they're important parts of the ear still. So the next thing to look at is these little tubes here. And these are called semicircular canals. So semicircular because they're shaped like half a circle, and they're called canals because they're actually hollow little tubes. And they're filled with fluid as well, just like the cochlea is. But the job of the semicircular canals is to control our balance. And they give us a sense of balance even when our eyes are closed and we can't see the ground or the horizon. Provide our sense of balance. So it's a pretty amazing sense, and it proves that we've got more than just 5 senses, because our sense of balance is an extra sense. And like I said, it works if your eyes are closed. So that's why we can close our eyes and we can walk in a straight line, or relatively straight, without falling over. And it's why if you close your eyes and bend over or tilt your head to one side, you can feel which direction is up and which direction's down. And it's all because those semicircular canals, they've got special cells in there too that are detecting the water as it moves. And they're telling our brain which direction's up and which direction's down. Okay, the final part of the ear is this tube down here, and this is called the Eustachian Tube. And I always spell it wrong. C-H-I-A-N, Eustachian. And the Eustachian tube, it's connected down here to the back of our throat here. And what it does is it allows air to come in to the middle ear in here, where the ossicles are, and that balances the air pressure on the other side of the eardrum. So it keeps the air pressure equal in the middle ear. And that's the reason why we feel our ears pop if you've ever been on a plane before. And it's also why we feel our ears pop when we're driving up a mountain or down into a valley. Because if you go up a mountain, the air pressure changes, and that causes our eardrum to actually flex and change shape. And that's that weird sound that you can hear where everything sort of, your hearing starts ringing. Sometimes it's pretty painful. And so the Eustachian tube, it allows air to come in or air to go out again, and that makes the eardrum flex back to its normal shape again. So the Eustachian tube is really important for stopping our ears from bursting or causing any damage to the eardrum, which is pretty important for helping us hear. Okay, so they're all the parts of the ear that we need to know. The last thing we'll talk about is different ways that we can actually fix hearing. So how hearing loss can be improved. All right. Earlier on, we learnt about different ways that you can actually get hearing loss. And we had four different, the four most common ways of getting hearing loss, and we talked about those. So we had old age as a common one. It causes the hair cells in the cochlea to not be as sensitive as they were. You can also have nerve damage, either in the nerve, in the auditory nerve, or in the cochlea itself. You can also have a blockage, which just blocks the ear canal, and those ones are the easiest to fix. And the other one we talked about is trauma, which is things like getting a head injury or listening to music or sounds that are too loud over a long period of time. So DJs, construction workers, people working at an airport, they often get a loss of hearing due to trauma because of their workplace, because it's so loud. And luckily, doctors and scientists have figured out ways to improve hearing loss, depending on the type that you've got. So you might know someone who has a hearing aid. And a hearing aid is just essentially an earbud that records the sound nearby. So there's a microphone on this outer part here. It records the sound and it just amplifies it and plays it really loudly into the ear canal. So it's basically like us listening to the outside world with our earbuds turned on full volume. So it amplifies the incoming sound. So hearing aids are often used for people with old age who've got hearing loss just from natural aging processes, where the cochlea is not as sensitive as it was. Sometimes people need them if they've had trauma, or maybe they've got a blockage that can't be fixed through surgery. That's what hearing aids are useful for. But the other type that's particularly useful is called a cochlear implant. And as Australians, we should be really proud of this technology because scientists at a university in Melbourne actually created this design. And if you've ever heard of Professor Graham Clark, he's the scientist that led the team that came up with his invention. So the way a cochlear implant works is, you can see here, scientists actually implant, well, the doctor does this procedure, sorry, the surgeon will come in and they'll implant this electronic device, and it's a little electrode which produces electrical signals, and they implant it all the way in through the skull, into the cochlea, and through the inside of the cochlea, so it's filling up the cochlea there. So it's implanted inside the ear, right into the cochlea. There's an electronic device here on the inside of the skull, and then on the outside of the skull, there's a device here that's called the headpiece, and it's got a little microphone in there, just like a hearing aid, to pick up all the sounds of the environment. So as sounds come into the microphone, it then sends that sound through the skull into this part of the implant as basically a Wi-Fi signal, and then the implant sends that electrical signal through the electrode straight into the cochlea, and then the electrical signals are strong enough that they can actually send messages straight to the nerve, and it bypasses any of the hair cells that are in there that are damaged. So the sounds travel as electrical signals, and then they allow the nerve to pick up the sound, even though the cochlea might be damaged from trauma, maybe from a disease, or various other issues. So it allows the auditory nerve to detect a message and then pass that on to the brain like it normally would. So people with a cochlear implant, we can give it to people who are completely deaf and we can restore their hearing completely. So it's an amazing invention that's been used worldwide ever since. Okay, so you should be able to explain all the parts of the ear and how they work, and how cochlear implants work to improve people's hearing.